Good afternoon, distinguished guests from the Fiji Times, members of the school management, staff, students and friends. On behalf of Suva School family, it is an honor and a pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to you all, our esteemed guests from the Fiji Times. We are truly delighted to have you here with us today as you mark an incredible milestone of 150 years of commitment service to the people of Fiji. Your legacy as a nation, always newspaper, is not only testament of your resilience, but also your endurance, dedication to true public service and national development. Today's visit is especially meaningful to us, and it's not only celebration of your rich history, but also a powerful gestures in giving back to the community. Your donation of books to Suva Grammar School is deeply appreciated. It reflects your belief in the power of education, in the value of knowledge, and nurturing the next generation of thinkers, readers, and leaders. Books open doors to new world. They inspire, inform, and intimidate curiosity. Your kind contribution will enrich our library, support our students' learning journeys, and leave a lasting impact on the future. Once again, we warmly welcome you to Suva Grammar School. We thank you sincerely for generosity, and we congratulate the Fiji Times in reaching 150 years of excellence. May your journey forward continues to be guided by purpose, service, and success. And welcome once again. Members of the school, fellow staff, and friends. It is with great joy to extend a heartfelt welcome to a very special guest, one of your very own, Dr. Anirudh Subramani, a former student of this school, who has returned not just to visit, but to give back in a meaningful and generous way. We are truly honored, sir, to receive your donation of books, a gift that reflects your deep belief in the power of education and your lasting connection to the place where your journey began. Your thoughtful contribution will not only enrich our school library, but also guide our young minds, and imagination of countless students in the years to come. Books are more than pages bound together. They are windows to the world, guides to new knowledge, and companions in time of curiosity and growth. Through this donation, you are giving our students the tools to dream, discover, and develop into leaders and thinkers of tomorrow. Your visit today reminds us of that success is not only measured by what we achieve, but also by what we give back. You are a living example of the values we strive to instill our students: generosity and gratitude, and lifelong love for learning. On behalf of the school management, staff, and students' body, I sincerely thank you for your generosity and welcome you back to your school, a place that will always be proud to call you one of its own. And welcome home, sir.
Good afternoon, Suva Grammar family. On behalf of the Fiji Times team, I would like to thank you all Year 13 students and teachers for welcoming us so warmly into your school today with such a soulful song. We are here for something special, to celebrate and share the Fiji Times 150 Years book, which tells the story of Fiji through the lens of our newspaper that's been part of the nation's history for a century and a half. Now, before we hear from the right-hand historian who brought this publication to life, I would like to welcome one of our very own Fiji Times staff who will speak on the legacy of journalism in Fiji. Ms. Sharon Wilson, who is from Kandavo, is a veteran Fijian journalist and former news anchor, known for her work with Fiji TV, and is now the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Fiji Times. Ms. Wilson.
I'll wear my glasses because I read books a lot at school and even after that. So I'm basically here to talk to you about the Fiji Times and the importance of reading. My career started off with an interest, a keen interest in reading. Now for the Fiji Times, you might have been in your classrooms today, and I don't know if at 1 a.m. this morning, if you knew that the International Court of Justice, for the first time, clarified that countries' legal duties on climate change. So now, Pacific Island countries, and this initiative was led by Pacific Island youths like you, and I know many of you will get into the space of climate change after leaving school. So the ruling that was delivered by the International Court of Justice last night was very important in terms of what we smaller island nations can do now to make bigger pollution-emitting countries pay for what they emit, and that impacts climate change. So those are one of the historical things that's happening in our world at the moment, and which we will capture in the papers tomorrow. Another thing, this International Seabed Authority is also meeting in Jamaica. They are talking about seabed mining in international waters, and Fiji is part of the discussions on how resources on the seabed should be used fairly. Now Fiji has said, no, we're not going to go into deep sea mining at the moment. Why I'm telling you this, I'm setting the stage, or giving you a setting of why it's important to read, and also not just read your books, not just read what we used to have, the Hardy Boys, and the Nancy Drew, and the romance novels, but also it's so important that you catch up with current affairs, okay? And it's important that you grab a paper if you can. I hope your school pays a subscription fee for the Fiji Times, and that's in your school library, whenever you can. And of course, there's also the online edition that we put out every day. So why that's important? Also happening in history today, just a few hours ago, our police force was out in Wailandalami seizing 28 kgs of methamphetamine. That's important because that's going to come out in the news tomorrow, and is already out in the news. We have the Kandavo Provincial Council. Hands up those of you who are from Kandavo. The Kandavo Provincial Council happening, the Rewa Provincial Council meeting that's happening, Pacific Women Leaders are happening. Your Provincial Council meetings are so important because they talk about the issues that your cousins and your relatives back in the village face. So these are the issues. It's not something we're just covering now, and that I'm trying to encourage you to read up on, to grab your newspaper, or to look at the online edition when you can, so you can catch up with what's happening in your country. These are issues that have been covered in the past, the different challenges that our nation faced, that our people, that when we were young, just like you face, but the stories are just different. The challenges have become harder. The newspaper or the media is so important because it's a what? It's a country speaking back to itself. Okay? When you're looking at the media, when you're reading up on news, I hope you're registering that this is the country that I live in at the moment. Okay? The only drug problem that those of my generation faced was marijuana. Now you are faced with a more complicated issue, with worse off consequences, the issues of illicit drugs, methamphetamine. Before I carry on, I want to say Muluvinaka on behalf of the Fiji Times. We thank you for giving your time, and we thank the school for giving this time to the company to present why it's so important, why this book is so important and will become such a source of information, an important source of information for you. When you go into university, to those of you who are looking at entering university next year, research, better papers, richer papers are not just from lectures and what you get within your classrooms, okay? If you're reading beyond what everyone else is reading, you'll have a better edge with your papers. So the Fiji Times at 150 was launched in 2023. In 2023, when they launched this book, I was serving in the Prime Minister's office as media advisor. Now that's a job I never thought I would end up in, but that's because of the power of knowledge and the hunger for information and writing, because when you read, you become better writers. Now the personal reason I'm here, a few weeks ago I posted a photo of the former chief editor of the Fiji Times, Mr. Netanirika, and how lucky I was to have been sitting with him at a press conference with the former Attorney General Graham Leong, because to me, Netani is a hero. We had a rule at home. My dad would be the first to read the newspaper every morning, but I wanted to read it before he did. So my way of getting around that was volunteering every day to run to the shop every morning. I'm going to get the paper first, read it under the street light, put the pages back together and leave it on the dinner table, on the table for Daddy when he wakes up. Because my dad would get angry if he finds out that someone has been through the paper before him. So my interest in journalism or in the media has actually grown from a very young age. Journalism is not a glamorous job. Journalism is hours of hard work. Journalism does not start at 8 o'clock and end at 5 o'clock when you knock off. Journalism is a continuous thing, and now with the internet, where information changes every minute, that has made our work even more strenuous or more complicated, because we are competing with information that is shared online. Why mainstream media is so important, why information sources like the Fiji Times is so important, is because the mainstream media, unlike social media, we verify the information that we are putting out for you to read. Since 1869, the Fiji Times has chronicled cyclones, coups, victories on the rugby field. We have a library at the Fiji Times. If you ever do research and you want stories from dating back, right back to the 60s where you can find pictures, we have a library at the Fiji Times where you can source those stories. Now 150 years is not just a number, it's 54,750 front pages of Fiji's collective memory, page by page, proof that, as the Prime Minister said at the book launch, most of them could not have happened without people like me, without people like you, and all other people who populate our islands. The Fiji Times at 150 is a time machine. It's not like in the movie, but it's a time machine that is bound in a book. From the first issue printed on hand press to last year's digital headlines, it delivers news items, headlines, photographs, ads, wit, wisdom, and reveal who we were, who we are, and who we might become. If you're able to, I found a copy of this book at the Fiji Museum when I was there earlier this week, or last week. If your family is able to afford a book, I would suggest that you ask your parents to get one. It's such a great resource for you to sit at home. Any of you sit at home and just scroll through magazines or books while you're in the living room, or you want the phone, or you prefer the phone? prefer the phone. Reading is so important because even when you're left behind, even when you decide probably at some point at tertiary level, okay, maybe I'll give myself a break from school, maybe I'll take a gap year, maybe I'll just rethink what I want to do in the next 5 months. It's so important for you to read. If you're gathering information from the same news source, what sets you apart from the next student? What sets your research apart from the research of the next student? How are you giving your research or your history assignments or your English assignments or whatever assignment? How are you giving it more depth by real stories, everyday stories? We no longer have to reference history. We can reference history, but how do you give more depth to your assignments? You can't do that through mainstream media. Why? Through information that is vetted, that is published, and through books like this one, the Fiji Times at 150. Why? Because they're vetted information. When we every day can put together a story, don't think that we just go to the market, get a story, print it out for you to read. There's a whole process in the newsroom that we go through. Unlike if you're sitting at home and you don't like Chone and you write something about Chone on social media, unvetted information. You may not know what has caused Chone to behave in that way, the circumstances, his social circumstances, his economic circumstances. So I'm trying to explain to you there's a whole process that we go through in the newsroom before we put out a story that you can use as research to back your assignments or your papers that you will prepare. This is very important because you're going into tertiary level next year. I hope you're all planning to go to higher education next year. And I hope that after we're done from Suva Grammar today, that this is not something that will sit on the shelf and gather dust, sit in your library and gather dust. We can tell when a book is not opened. I have 2 boys who are still in primary school. I got them a set of books and I can tell that they're not reading because the pages are still perfect. So I hope that the same will not happen here in Suva Grammar. Suva Grammar has raised some of the most amazing minds in this country, like Professor Subramani, who's here with us today. Suva Grammar, I went to St. Joseph's. When they told me yesterday, you have to go and give a book. Why am I going to Suva Grammar? I should go and give a book at St. Joseph's. So I hope that after we leave here today, that you will be going to the library, or when you're in the library, you will be opening this book for information that can give more depth to your schoolwork. Before I round off, it's so important. Reading is so important. It's so difficult to tell children today, please read a book. Please pick up the book. When you graduate, when you finish school, I pulled up an interesting article earlier today about the concerns of the Ministry of Education that kids that are going up to Form 3 still can't read. I'm glad Siteri has picked up the habit for me. She loves reading. When I bought the Barack Obama book, 500 pages, a couple of years ago, I had to look for it because she had grabbed it and was reading it in the room. But this is the thing, interest. Okay, you may be scrolling, but what are you feeding your mind? It's so important that you pick up a book and read. It's so important that when you enter the workforce, you can put a proper sentence together. You will be sending an email. If you are in an organization, you might be expected to put a report together. A simple email or a request that requires copyright, so you should be able to read, and to be able to write properly, you should be able to read more than what you're able to access and source. So I hope with leaving you today, I hope we will inspire you today to do more than just scrolling the latest TikTok videos or scrolling through the latest gossip on Facebook. And I hope for those of you who read, I encourage you to keep reading. When your vocabulary bag is about this much, I hope you can increase it to this much before you get into tertiary studies next year. And thank you very much again, Suva Grammar, for having us today. And I hope that I have not gone off script for too long. I will now ask Professor Subramani to take the stage. Thank you.
It's great to be back at the greatest school on the planet. Suva Grammar School. The principal, vice principal, teachers, and mostly the students of Suva Grammar School, the general manager of the Fiji Times, the staff of Fiji Times. Thank you so much for being here at this event. It is such a thrill. It is such a wonderful moment for me to be here, standing here in front of you. It's like history for me has come full circle. Many years ago, when I was a teenager like you, I stood in this hall for various reasons, sometimes to collect school prizes, etc. But mostly it was to represent my class and also Suva Grammar School in oratory contests. And I'll never forget that thrill, the feeling of being part of something great, being part of an institution which is so recognizable, that is so revered in history, in Fiji's history. However, for me, Suva Grammar School, you know, if somebody asked me, if you could go back in time to any place, any point in your life, it would be back to school at Suva Grammar School. You know, you sometimes think and you reminisce and you wonder how the years have passed. And I'm telling you all to cherish this moment, you know, because this moment will go by so fast. You guys will soon be in university, you'll be working, and you look back and you think, wow, the years have gone. And I was at Suva Grammar School, I had all these friends. Suva Grammar School for me was not just a place where I made friends and a place which nurtured me, but Suva Grammar School was also responsible for my formative years. What I mean by that is that my passion for certain things was forged at this very institution. A couple of things. Number one, my passion for public speaking, my passion for English literature, and my passion for history. When I was at Suva Grammar School, I was a very short, very skinny bloke. Very small and very skinny. And you know, when you're small and skinny, you always get bullied and picked on. But one of the things that I did in order to overcome my fright was take part in oratory contests. Although I was always the smallest in the class, I always took part in oratory contests. And I used to stand right here. And I used to look at everybody, and I used to speak. And slowly, my fear of public speaking just vanished. I have a problem these days of intimacy. That means speaking one-on-one with people. But I can stand in front of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, and I will not have any fear at all. And Suva Grammar School is responsible for that, for taking away that fear that I had of people and of public speaking. The second thing is my love of literature. I was blessed, absolutely blessed, to have the greatest English teachers you could ever want. Form 2, I had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Liku, who, expected so much from me. I had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Elsabi Prasad, who once declared in Form 5 that Anurag Subramani is the best writer in this class. And that was such a great moment for me. I wonder where she is now. I had Mrs. Khan, there was Mr. Ashish, but most of all, one guy I remember, Mr. Patrick Dinati. And I learned several years ago that he passed away. And Mr. Dinati made learning such a joy, But the thing is, my love of English literature had already been born at home because my father was an English professor. And one of the great memories I have of being at home was that our house was always full of bookshelves, stacked well with books. Every room you could imagine, even in the kitchen, there was a bookshelf with books. And for me, my father's greatest assets were not the car, or the house, or his clothes, but his books. He treasured his books more than anything else in this world. And he passed many of those, he's still alive, but he passed many of those books to me. And there was a great love and a great respect for reading in my house. Reading and books were revered. And when you pick up a book as an adult, and when you read, you are setting an example for your children. Your children will do the same. If you love books, you will infect your children with the love of reading. So in a way, I already came to school with this passion for English literature, but it was enhanced by the teachers that I had. Those wonderful teachers. And I wish I could meet them again and thank them. But I think my one passion that I did not have, but I acquired at Suva Grammar was my love of history. And again, such wonderful history teachers. Particularly Mr. Nand, there was a Mr. Shandil, but most of all, a name that you would all recognize, Professor Stephen Ratuva. Professor Ratuva, he was my high school teacher. He was also a young, bloke fresh out of high school. He wanted to change the world. He was a Marxist, and he came with his fresh ideas, and he infected us with this enthusiasm for history and learning. Now, in many forums, I have criticized the way history is taught in high schools. I have written this in newspapers, I have made public speeches about the way that history has been taught in high schools. I'm not sure what is being done at the moment, but in our time and times after that, when I spoke to former students, they would say, it's the same, you're told to acquire information, facts and figures, basically rote learning, and you would have to regurgitate all this, numbers and facts and figures and names during the examination. But that is not what history is. I have said time and time again that when you learn history, what you are trying to learn, what you're trying to develop is a historical consciousness. And that is what people like Stephen Ratuva did. They instilled in me not facts and figures and numbers, but he provoked me with the thought and the idea and the question, why? Why should we learn history? Things that have happened in the past, why should we go back and learn history? The history is, for all intent and purposes, buried. It'll never come back again. So why should we learn about that? He also provoked us to question, what kind of history is it that we want to learn? What is the value of history? What is the value of history for the future? Who has the right to write history? And this is a big question in Pacific Island societies, where much of our history, including Fiji, has been written by outsiders. It is not until J.W. Davidson inaugurated what we call the Pacific-oriented history at the Australian National University in the 1950s when Pacific Islanders picked up the pen and started to write their own history. Prior to that, history was mainly written by Europeans. And obviously, the history contained many biases, many stereotypes about our people. Perhaps the first great historian of Fiji was Professor Bridge-Lau, the late Professor Bridge-Lau. And he tried to revise many of those inaccuracies of history that were written by outsiders. You know, in historiography, there are several schools of thought. One school of thought is that history is about big men, M-E-N, big men. So the big man school of history teaches us that history is always about the movers and shakers. You know, people who do big things, big deeds. You know, like Vakambao, like Ratumara, like Sitiveni Rambuka, like Adi Patel, like Jairam Reddy. You know, the movers and shakers in society. That's the big man school of history. Sometimes you call it history from above. There's another school of history, which is history from below. We also call it subaltern history, or history of the common people, or people's history, or there's another word you should learn, it's called subaltern history. Subaltern simply means the common man. I think at Suva Grammar School, and through my reading literature, I came to a specific philosophy of history, which was the subaltern or people's school of history. When I was reading literature, I read books like, you know, authors like V.S. Naipaul, who wrote Miguel Street. V.S. Naipaul was born in the West Indies. West Indies, as you know, was also a former British colony, a sugar colony, where Indians were brought over. You know, he became a great writer. And, you know, he was knighted, and that's all he did for a living. But his greatest books like Miguel Street and other authors like George Orwell, you might not know George Orwell, who wrote Animal Farm, 1984. But he also wrote books like The Road to Wigan Pier, Down and Out in Paris and London. Also John Steinbeck, who wrote Tortilla Flat, Cannery Row. Why I'm citing these novels is because these novels are always about the down and out, the downtrodden. They were never about big men. They were always about the common men, the common people. They were about quirky, idiosyncratic characters, people who did strange things. You know, in V.S. Naipaul's book, Miguel Street, you have characters named such as Popo, Hat, Man. There's a character by Man, who's a carpenter, who makes things, who builds things without a name. The narrator asks him, so, Mr. Popo, what are you building? He said, that's the question. I'm building a thing without a name. So quirky characters. What I'm getting at is my philosophy, my love of history came through literature. You see? So when I was asked to write the 150-year book of the Fiji Times, I just did more of the same. I said, my book is not going to be about the big men. My book is not going to be a political history of Fiji. It's not going to be an economic history of Fiji, because a political, economic history of Fiji has already been done many times by many different authors, including Bridge-Lau. But nobody had written a social history. What is a social history? A social history is about, say, sports, you know. But in my book, you'll find not only stories about rugby and rugby sevens, but you'll find history of bowling. You'll find the history of boxing and wrestling. These were the big sports at that time, before rugby sevens and rugby came about in the 1930s. The big sports in Fiji at the turn of the century, you know, when the first whites came in the 1870s, they were bowling, they were cricket. Fiji had a great cricket team. You know, they toured Ratu Kandavu level. They toured New Zealand and they were unbeaten at the time. Wrestling was huge. Boxing was huge. So it's a history of these minor sports. It's also a history of the cinema. The entire history, I'm fascinated by cinema, the theater, movies, and the entire history of Fiji's cinema is in this book. For example, in 1895, when the first movies or the picture shows arrived in Suva by the Lumiere cinematograph, this is several years, just several years after cinema was first invented. Suva got to see films. So it's the history of cinema. It's the history of fashion. It's the history of buildings, architecture. So this is a social history of Fiji. And I deliberately set to do that and write that. There are also little quirky stories about common men, common people. You know, there are big people there, obviously. The movers and shakers are there. But what I have done is not try to put them on the spotlight. I've put them in the wings. Take this stage, for example, yeah? The stage has the wings, and you have the center stage. So in my history, the movers and shakers are in the wings, and the common men, they're all at the center stage. And that's a deliberate thing that I did, because that is my philosophy of history. I've set out to be a people's historian or a subaltern historian, and this is what I try to achieve. I remember the day the general manager, the late Hank Arts, asked me at his office, and he called me and he said, "Well, Dr. Subramani, I have a challenge for you." Because what I was doing is, in 2017, 2018, I took a break from teaching at the University of the South Pacific, and I spent all my time in the National Archives of Fiji just digging documents. Oh, if you go to the National Archives of Fiji, you will find all the documents that you need to write Fiji's, including a letter written by Vakambau, handwritten by Vakambau. It is there in the National Archives of Fiji. The National Archives of Fiji is a treasure trove. It is some place that you all must visit at some time or another. Very important to do that. So I started digging, and I started finding all these wonderful stories about common men. For example, a 10-year-old boy by the name of Dwarka. In 1910, he was running around Suva, breaking into shops and homes. And he called himself the Prince of Thieves. And about 8 patients from the Makungai leper colony who got on 2 boats and they drifted off. 6 months later, they hit Vanuatu and they escaped from the authorities for 6 months. In 1948, a 17-year-old boy who wanted to go so badly to America went to Nasoso, and he ran after a plane, British Commonwealth plane. He ran, he jumped up the wheel carriage and he hid there. 16 hours later, he was in Honolulu. He was caught 3 days later. 1 month later, he was brought back to Fiji, but in the 1950s, he went back to America to live his dream. He wanted to be an engineer in the American Air Force. When he went in the 1950s, he became an engineer in the American Air Force. He is still alive today. He's 93 years old. I've spoken to him. Stories you probably never heard in high school history. These are the stories I wanted to dig up, and these are the stories I wanted to present to the people of Fiji, telling you that there's more to Fiji's history than politics and economics. There's so much more that has happened in Fiji, so many interesting things. And a lot of these stories have found their way in my the Fiji Times history book. And just finally, I'd like to say one thing. It is so unfortunate that from high school level, the different subjects have been categorized into little enclaves and given some sort of a hierarchy. You know, the sciences are right on top, then you have the arts, etc., etc. So if you're a science student or if you're a brighter student, you're encouraged to go at the university and do law, you're encouraged to do science. I do not subscribe to that point of view. I think you should do what you want to do. When I was teaching foundation at one point, I had so many bright students, history students, local students, and I thought they would become great historians. Unfortunately, when they went to year one, the government offered them lower scholarships, and we lost them to the dark side. These would have been great. There are no local historians. Even if you go to our history department at the University of the South Pacific, we have expatriates. There is one lady who graduated a few years ago, and she's the only local. But all throughout the history of USP, our historians have all been expatriates. Where are the local historians? What is happening? This country is overrun with lawyers. They're coming out of every nook and cranny. We do not need more lawyers. We don't need more historians. I urge you all, consider a career in history. And not just taking history and becoming a journalist or a politician, but being a historian, going to the archives, digging through the documents, sifting through and finding all the wonderful and magical. It's like being a detective, piecing things together. We need locals to pick up the pen and to write the history of Fiji. If we do not write our own history, others will do it for us. And when others do it for us, it will be full of inaccuracies and biases. You know what Bob Marley said? If you don't know your history, you don't know who the hell you are or where you're coming from, isn't it? Yeah? It's important to read history. It is also important for you young people to consider writing history. And that's all I have to say today. And just before I go, again, thank you so much for listening to me and for welcoming me back home.